The family doctor, whose duty was to preserve life, confirmed now as a mass murderer, the full extent of his crimes as yet unknown.
Dr. Harold Frederick Shipman of Hyde, Manchester, murdered 215 of his patients over a 20-year period. His reputation as a caring GP in a close-knit town was a thin veil for his evil killings. He committed the ultimate betrayal in patient-doctor trust and callously murdered with lethal injection, making this a crime that shook Britain.
It's the last thing that you would expect is a well-respected doctor in a small town, might be killing his patients.
A man who exercised the ultimate power of controlling life and death.
As far as he was concerned, he was a doctor. It wasn't for people to question what he had done, and it certainly wasn't a matter for the police to be questioning him about.
Even when everything came out, people still couldn't believe that it was Dr. Shipman.
The prosecution alleged that the Hyde GP enjoyed killing his patients.
Whenever Mum spoke about Shipman, he was a wonderful man and he was very caring and very loyal and did whatever he could. And it seemed very odd that all of a sudden when she died, he turned into this monster.
Harold Shipman ran a busy one-man surgery in a town of 22,000 people. His patients held him in high regard. But Shipman held an unimaginable secret, one that goes against the oath of any doctor. He was killing his patients. In 1998, his cover was blown, and 2 years later, he was convicted of murdering 15 patients. Dr. Shipman is now the biggest single mass murderer the world has ever seen, after he was finally accused of 215 killings.
When I met Dr. Shipman, he wasn't a particularly friendly person. He was quite arrogant and aloof most of the time with his fellow doctors.
He reduced a rep from a pharmaceutical company to tears because he was just so aggressive in the way he was dealing with her.
Shipman was very respected in the community, with families, patients and other professional people.
Mum was always over the moon about how wonderful he was, how well he treated my dad, how well he treated my mum, what a brilliant doctor he was. And I was always, blimey, this came across as a bit of a Superman.
This film will tell the story of serial killer Harold Shipman through the eyewitness accounts of his colleagues from the other local practice and the relatives forced to live with his crimes. November 1997. Dr. Shipman is conducting house calls. Today, he is visiting Marie Quinn, a 67-year-old local lady who has been a loyal patient of his for 20 years. Shipman claims to find Marie unconscious and takes the decision not to resuscitate. He apparently makes a call to a loved one, delivering the devastating news that she has died of a stroke.
We received a call to say that Mrs. Quinn had passed away at home. We were told that we couldn't move her body at the time because there was nobody in the house to let us in. Therefore, we had to wait until after Shipman's surgery had closed and he was going to let us in.
Shipman has a reputation for visiting his elderly patients at home, so when Debbie receives a call from his surgery, it isn't unusual. But today, something seems amiss.
We took Mrs. Quinn to the Chapel of Rest, but we couldn't quite understand why he had a key to let us into the house.
Hello, Debbie.
The funeral directors have started to feel uneasy about some of Shipman's deceased patients. Certain elements just aren't adding up, and now more alarm bells are ringing.
His wife was also with him, which wasn't normal, but we were told that she was there to take the cat away.
Shipman certifies the death from a stroke. Paperwork is filed, and family and friends are left to mourn. Marie didn't appear to be ill, but the expert has given his opinion. Life in Hyde continues. But on the 10th of December, another patient of Shipman dies suddenly at her home. Bianca Pomfret is just 49 years old.
She lived alone and had done for some years. For many years she'd suffered from depression. The day before, when the support worker had spoken to her, she had been well and had not been complaining of any condition, certainly any serious condition.
Bianca thought very highly of her doctor and was well known at his surgery. But her medical complaints were not life-threatening. Now she lies dead, yet apart from her frequent ailments, she hasn't complained of any other conditions.
On the day that she died, she'd been seen by a neighbour. Later on that day, one of her support workers called her to home, knocked on the door and couldn't get any reply. As a result of that, she contacted Bianca's son, who came round. They got access to the house, found that the door in actual fact was unlocked, and they found Bianca sat in a chair, dead, fully dressed.
Here is another death that doesn't add up. In the following months, the funeral directors grow increasingly concerned. More of Shipman's patients are found in unusual circumstances. By February 1998, Debbie is compelled to share their concerns.
We were a bit uneasy really with the numbers of his patients that were dying at home, and the majority of them were always women. We didn't quite know who to talk to, so I made a decision one day when Dr. Booth came to our chapel of rest to sign some cremation forms to have a word with her.
She was worried that the way that they were being found, didn't seem as though they'd been lying in bed ill. They weren't in their night clothes, they were sat in a chair, fully dressed.
And said, don't you think that you're coming to do to countersign too many of Shipman's forms? It could be that they died at home quite peacefully and naturally. But on the other hand, if things weren't quite right, then we needed to speak to somebody, we needed to reach out to someone.
I was quite shocked as well at what she might be suggesting, that she was suggesting that Dr. Shipman might be killing his patients.
A number of patients now lie dead with no previous major ill health. And the doctor with one of the best reputations in medicine is now under scrutiny.
Really, my first memory was when Sue Booth came knocking, very, very agitated.
Unfortunately, Dr. Patel was in surgery. He was just as horrified and shocked as I was, and I thought, well, we have to discuss it with the whole partnership together and decide what we're going to do.
The undertakers had made some remarks about Shipman, which she had found very upsetting and also very alarming, and that she really wasn't sure what to do next.
More alarming news is about to follow, as Sue Booth is called upon once more.
That weekend, Dr. Reynolds rang me at home and said she had suspicions about Dr. Shipman being a murderer, and she was very concerned and she wanted to discuss it anyway.
As the GPs at the neighbouring practice call an urgent meeting, Shipman goes about his daily duties. Unaware he is under suspicion, he is again conducting house calls. Today, he is visiting one of his loyal patients, 77-year-old Ada Warburton.
She was a fanatical pressure cooker person. She was really well nourished and a fruit and veg fanatic. She took really good care of herself.
Shipman has made an unannounced visit to Ada, but she welcomes him in regardless. Meanwhile, Raj, Sue and colleagues voice their growing concerns.
Normally we had our practice meetings on the premises, but because of the sensitive nature of the discussion, we decided that we'd hold it away from Hyde, so we met in a pub in Heaton Moor.
Harold Shipman told me that Auntie Ada had been in contact with him. She wondered if she'd had a stroke.
Can I ask you to roll your sleeves up? Right. It won't take long. Won't be minutes.
And he then said that he would go and check on her later in the day.
We knew there was a discrepancy, but one which simply seemed to be anecdotal and observed by people rather than anything based on numbers or figures. We then discussed whether we were talking about possibly some kind of professional incompetence or some kind of malpractice. Linda at that point said, well, she thought that he was perhaps deliberately harming his patients. And this was just a turning point, I think, for all of us. Once somebody has made that statement, there is no going back.
He told me that he had found my telephone number by rooting through the bureau when he had come across her will. He'd found my name in her will, and he continued rooting then until he'd found an address book with my telephone number.
We decided that one of the doctors would look at our number of deaths in the previous 2 years in the practice and compare it with the number of certification requests we'd had from Dr. Shipman. If a person wants one of their relatives to be cremated, you need a cremation certificate which has to be signed by 2 doctors.
He never told me anything. It was really weird. And then he said that he thought she'd had a stroke. At this stage I had to stop him and say, well, where is she now? You know, is she in the hospital? Did it not amount to anything? Is she at home? And he then told me that she passed away.
A few days later, the doctors nervously await the results. They urgently need to analyse the death rates between their surgery and Shipman's across the road. Then the figures come through.
They were just astounding that there were something like 41 occasions when Shipman had asked us to countersign cremation forms over many months, and during the same period of time we had only had 14 deaths from around 10,000 people.
You, at the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, this can't be true. It can't be true that a doctor is killing his patients. It's just unbelievable.
March 1998. Officers from Greater Manchester Police launch an investigation into the allegations against Harold Shipman. GPs from a surgery just 20 yards away have discovered an alarming number of deaths from his practice and decide to contact police via the coroner.
We were entirely prepared to be wrong at the time. And I think certainly Linda probably felt more acutely aware of this than anybody else, that here she was coming from outside of Hyde into an area where she had only been practicing for a short time, and she was challenging somebody else's reputation.
Despite the doctor's reservations, matters have to be investigated. D.I. Smith is assigned to the case. His first port of call is Dr. Linda Reynolds. He heads over to Brook Surgery.
The rest of us only worked in Hyde, had only our limited experience of working with Dr. Shipman across the road as a neighbouring doctor. Was Linda had come to us from another practice in Reddish, and certainly her experience about doing cremation forms was that she was doing far more for Dr. Shipman since she'd arrived in Hyde than she had been at her previous practice.
She'd also found it suspicious that he'd been present at quite a few of the deaths.
We really did not want any of this to be true. We genuinely wanted somebody just to look at the difference in death rates and simply to say these differences were entirely understandable.
As D.I. Smith and Dr. Reynolds discussed the concerns, one of Shipman's patients, 88-year-old Martha Marley, has just come off the phone to her daughter.
It was the habit of her daughter to actually telephone her mother around about 9 o'clock each morning and around about 6 o'clock each evening. Her daughter rang her as usual around about 9 o'clock. Her mother didn't complain of any illness. She seemed well and bright, and she arranged then to ring her mother later on in the day as usual.
But later that day, routine is broken as Martha's daughter struggles to contact her. Meanwhile, Shipman takes open surgery at his clinic. Whilst across the road, police are being told he might be murdering his patients. It is the details from this initial meeting that determine the nature of the rest of D.I. Smith's inquiry. From his time with Dr. Reynolds, he doesn't place importance on vital information. The relevance of a second doctor signing a cremation form, the availability of a body to autopsy, the difference between the death rates at the two surgeries, and the relevance of interviewing any other doctor at the practice. But this is a unique case, and Smith isn't experienced in this kind of investigation. Now, as D.I. Smith leaves Brooks Surgery, Dr. Shipman is busy with his other patients. At 6:45 p.m, Martha Marley is found dead at her home.
The paramedics were summoned to Martha's home and obviously found that she had died. The cause of death given by Shipman subsequently was that she had died from old age.
A body now lies in the morgue with similar characteristics of other patient deaths. Alone, at home, and with no major health complaints. But the investigation heads in another direction, and doctors at Brooks Surgery carry on as normal. Police haven't advised to do anything different should another death occur. But just 2 days later, another cremation form arrives from Shipman.
I was far more aware that this particular death may well be under police scrutiny.
As the investigation gets underway and Martha Marley's body waits to be put to rest, another of Shipman's recently deceased patients, Ada Warburton, who Shipman visited 6 days ago, now also lies dead.
When I was told that she had died, I was absolutely stunned. I was stunned because I spoke to her very often, and had she been ill, she would have mentioned it.
2 bodies could now hold the key to Shipman's crimes, but this avenue remains undetected. D.I. Smith instead turns his attention to the town hall to discover how many deaths have been registered by Shipman in the last 6 months.
It appears that in searching registers that some of the deaths were actually missed, and there was a smaller number actually given to D.I. Smith than in actual fact Shipman had been involved in.
Police are led to believe they are dealing with a lower number of potential deaths than is the case. Discreet investigations continue. All the while, Shipman goes about his duties as normal. And 2 potential victims lie in the mortuary, about to be cremated. Dr. Reynolds believes these might hold the vital clues needed.
He had mentioned at one point to CID that there were 2 bodies at the undertakers that could have been examined by post-mortem.
Linda thought that the police would be looking into that, just as a normal follow-up to that inquiry. I'm now of the opinion that the police didn't look at that.
When Shipman phoned me on the Friday night when he told me that Auntie Ada had died, he told me that he'd inform the police because the house had to be secured. So whilst he was speaking to me, policemen actually came into the room. The policeman took the telephone from Shipman, and he was the first to mention post-mortem. In less than 10 seconds, it was quite apparent that Shipman he'd managed to tell him that this wouldn't be necessary.
No autopsies have been ordered. Vital evidence could be lost forever. Later that day, Ada Warburton is cremated.
Anyone who knows me knows that had I been discreetly asked to give permission for post-mortem, I wouldn't have liked it, but I would have gone along with it to help an investigation.
The coroner nor D.I. Smith is aware of Ada's death. They are also unaware of Martha Marley's death, who was cremated the very next day. It is now 1 week into the investigation. D.I. Smith needs to see if there are any discrepancies in the deaths registered by Shipman. He decides to visit Dr. Banks at the West Pennine Health Authority. Dr. Banks deals with complaints about health practitioners in the area.
Dr. Banks' opinion was that there was nothing out of the ordinary with those notes and the action that was taken by Dr. Shipman. It may well have reassured him that there was no medical evidence to suggest that Shipman had been involved in the deaths of these individuals.
Shipman, on the other hand, seemed to have, appeared to have, a lot of elderly patients and retired people. And again, this seemed to indicate that there were differences in what he would experience and what we would experience.
If police were to search Shipman's practice profile, they discover he has a less than average list of elderly patients and a smaller percentage of females than any other practice in Thameside, blowing the myth that most of his patients are old and female. The chance for autopsies has now passed, and to D.I. Smith there appears to be nothing of concern in Shipman's records. But before closing the case, D.I. Smith visits the local cemetery to look into the number of cremations.
What he wanted from there was details of the undertakers that had been involved in the burying or in the cremation of individuals in order that he could conduct inquiries.
Meanwhile, Debbie Massey, the funeral director who first raised the alarm, hasn't been contacted about the deaths.
We were surprised that we hadn't been interviewed and asked questions on our concerns.
Relatives of the deceased are also unaware Shipman may have killed their loved ones.
At the time of Auntie Ada's death, I knew absolutely nothing of the rumours, of the police investigation.
Afterwards, of course, with hindsight, it's very easy to say, if I'd have been there, I'd have said I want a post-mortem. You can't say that. I had no need to ask for one, no reason to ask for one, because I didn't really understand why it should be necessary.
Police who attended some of the deaths haven't been contacted either. No checks have been made on the police national computer or with the General Medical Council to see if Shipman has any previous criminal history. If D.I. Smith were to look, he'd discover Shipman is a man with a sketchy past.
Shipman was convicted of offences relating to his abuse of pethidine. What he was doing was obtaining drugs illicitly by forging orders, which he was then using to inject himself. He was convicted at the local magistrates' court and received a heavy fine, although the General Medical Council took the view at that stage that no punishment should be imposed on him by themselves. He received a period of treatment and resumed practice around about 6 months later.
A vital piece of the jigsaw is missing. Police are unaware they are dealing with a man with a history of drug abuse. Possible victims have been cremated. Tests may have revealed high levels of diamorphine, but the case is closed.
I just breathed a huge sigh of relief at the time. I just thought that was good news as far as I was concerned, as I really didn't want there to be any truth in any of those observations.
Dr. Reynolds was still unhappy with the outcome of the investigation, so We agreed that we would just keep a close eye on the situation, but the bottom line had to be that the police said everything was okay.
Police seem convinced the popular GP is guilty of nothing more than caring for his patients. But Dr. Shipman goes on to kill 3 more women. 3 months have passed since police investigated claims that Dr. Shipman was murdering his patients. His colleagues remain on edge while Shipman remains in practice and seemingly untouchable. Today, he is visiting the home of Mrs. Kathleen Grundy, the former mayoress of Hyde. It is 8:30 a.m. and he has allegedly come to take a blood sample.
She was a lovely lady, a really lovely lady. Very friendly, extremely friendly with my mum.
Despite the fact that she was in her early 80s, she helped to serve meals to the elderly.
She was certainly very active in that whenever I saw her, she was always very well, and she was always another one who rushed around everywhere.
It's a busy day for Kathleen. She's an active woman who rises early and gets on with her day. In a few hours' time, she is due at the community centre to help out as usual, but finds time for Dr. Shipman beforehand. It is now 11:55 a.m. and friends John Green and Ronald Pickford are concerned Kathleen hasn't shown up at the luncheon club. They make the short walk to Joel Lane to check on her.
They found her door unlocked. They went inside because there was no answer to repeated knocking, and they found Kathleen dead on the settee in the lounge, fully dressed.
Dr. Shipman is called out immediately and certifies Kathleen's death as old age. Her family and friends, although massively shocked by the sudden death, pay tribute to her the following week. She's laid to rest at Hyde Chapel, near to her parents. But Kathleen's legacy doesn't end here. Her message from beyond the grave is about to blow the lid on the country's biggest serial killer.
Angela Woodruff was contacted by Hamilton Ward's solicitors only a few days after her mother's burial and tell her that they were in possession of a will allegedly made by her mother in which all her assets had been left to Dr. Shipman.
Kathleen's daughter Angela is left baffled by the news. Why leave a legacy to someone who wasn't particularly close? After a copy of the will is faxed through, Angela, a solicitor herself, heads straight to Hyde to investigate further.
In the body of the will, it talks about leaving my house. In actual fact, her mother owned 2 houses and obviously would have known that. So consequently, had she genuinely prepared that will, she would have talked about 2 houses. The general condition of the will, the way it had been prepared, it looked very, very amateurish. Kathleen Grundy had been a very particular individual, very neat person, and in actual fact hand wrote everything. Having seen the documents, Angela became extremely concerned. She decided that before she went to the police, she would make some inquiries of her own. One of the things that she did was to get out the paying-in slips for the Age Concern shop where Kathleen Grundy did the paying in. She wanted to compare the signatures on that with the signatures supposedly made by her mother on the will.
The signatures don't match. Angela needs to probe further. When she quizzes witnesses on the document, her fears grow.
Several days before he killed her, he actually got 2 members of the public who were sitting waiting in the waiting room to come into his surgery to sign a form. They believed that that was probably an insurance proposal form, something similar. What he said was that it was probably an insurance form. She asked him to sign it. He wouldn't get involved in anything like that, so he asked 2 members of the public. If that's the case, he would never have seen the will form and he would never have touched it. But his fingerprints were on it.
Kathleen had also been a picture of health shortly before her death, chatting with an old friend. Her meticulous diary showed she was expecting Shipman on that day to take a blood sample.
Subsequent inquiries revealed that no such survey was taking place. And in fact, in respect of Shipman's explanation, the blood sample that he allegedly took that morning did not turn up. It had not been sent to the pathology lab, and it wasn't still in his surgery.
For a second time, Harold Shipman comes to police attention. And now, the devastating facts are going to be irrefutable. No blood was taken from Mrs. Grundy. Shipman's elaborate plan is about to be foiled. He has callously murdered Kathleen and tried to forge her will to inherit nearly £400,000.
There was a headline on Radio 4, Tameside doctor accused of murder and forging a will. As soon as I heard that news report, I was convinced he was guilty of my mum's death.
It's a cold summer evening in Hyde, Manchester. Police take the dramatic decision to exhume the body of Kathleen Grundy. Detective Superintendent Bernard Postles now leads the case. They fear Kathleen has been killed by her GP, Harold Shipman. Whispers in town are now in overdrive. Has the doctor, with over 3,000 patients, been killing those who gave him their unquestionable trust?
By the 1st of August, only 5 days after Angela expressed her concerns, we exhumed the body of her mother. Forensic tests needed to be carried out. In addition to that, the typewriter had been recovered from Dr. Shipman's surgery, which we believed had been used to prepare the will and the letter that accompanied it.
Mid-August. Shipman is well aware he is under suspicion for murder and forgery, but he carries on regardless, seeing patient after patient and even joking with those he treats. Whilst officers swoop on his surgery to seize other potential evidence, he shows only contempt for the inconvenience caused.
There appear to be further new concerns somewhere along the line that we haven't been involved with, but clearly, somebody is looking into this again.
We thought we'd put it all behind us, and then now it's starting again. And of course, the horrific numbers that were going to come out subsequently, we had no idea it was going to be as big as that.
The town of Hyde, Manchester, is in turmoil. Dr. Harold Shipman, one of its most popular GPs, is under police scrutiny, suspected of murder. Officers have now exhumed a body for tests, and property has been seized from Shipman's home and surgery. September 1998. Dr. Harold Frederick Shipman is arrested. To avoid a media scrum, they allow him to make his own way to Ashton Police Station with a solicitor. The police now have damning evidence.
The results came back from the toxicology tests, indicating that it was diamorphine that was in Kathleen Grundy's body. In terms of the will, the tests that were carried out showed that the will had been prepared on the typewriter, which was owned by Dr. Shipman, and that the signatures on it were probably forgeries.
Dr. Shipman's fabricated world is closing in, but he still defiantly keeps his composure. He strongly believes he'll be released after questioning later that day, but he never steps out of custody again.
He appeared in a confident manner, that this was perhaps an inconvenience to him, and my belief is that he fully expected to be leaving the police station within a few hours.
The devastation and magnitude of Shipman's crimes is overbearing for the whole community. As Shipman is charged with Kathleen's murder, police decide to exhume further patients. Ironically, Shipman's surgery is flooded with support from some loyal patients, hoping this is nothing more than a witch hunt or terrible misunderstanding.
He was so well respected in the town and well liked. The patients loved him. They all wanted to be on his list. He was a very popular doctor.
Harold Shipman has stood trial for the last 4 months.
It became apparent something was about to happen, and we got a whisper that they've come to a decision.
It was getting more and more difficult to question the amount of evidence that seemed to be mounting up against him.
Then it came to the first one of cremation, guilty. And then there was this big sigh, and then guilty of the next one. And the various relatives then who were sat behind me, whose relatives had been cremated, it's wrong to say a sigh of relief. It's a relief, I think, that it was over, but a sigh of horror that their relative had been murdered.
Shipman is convicted of 15 counts of murder and forging a will. Tight-lipped and defiant as ever, he is led away to start 15 life-term imprisonments and a concurrent 4-year term for forgery.
And I think by that point all of us were expecting that he was going to be found guilty of some of the deaths. But it still came as an enormous shock to find that he was convicted of 15.
My recommendation is that you should spend the remainder of your days in prison.
He shows no remorse, nor gives any explanation.
The fact that Shipman never spoke about the murders suits me fine. I had got no desire to listen to anything that man had to say.
Shipman's colleagues from Brooke Surgery and the funeral directors were right all along. From their first suspicions, it now transpires the doctor went on to kill 3 more women before finally being charged.
When my sister phoned me to say, Mum's died, I had an appalling reaction. I said, "You're joking." Well, of course, you don't joke on something like that. I just didn't know what to say, because having seen her 2 days before in the picture of health, how could she die?
You know, could we have prevented their deaths during that summer? You know, I feel terribly saddened for the families of those ladies.
He was really cold, nasty, rather derogatory about my mum, saying that she'd been suffering from angina, she'd been an awkward, cantankerous old lady, she wouldn't take her tablets, and it's not his fault she died. And it seemed very odd that all of a sudden when she died, he turned into this monster.
He was going out to harm the very people he was supposed to help. And that was probably the single lowest point for me personally. And to a certain degree, we almost felt guilty by association.
No comment. Dr. Shipman, we have reason to believe you have murdered Kathleen.
The big downfall for Dr. Shipman, in actual fact, was the way that he had actually maintained records. They weren't consistent. Certainly the medical records which he had altered weren't consistent with other records kept around about the time of the deaths, with the death certificates, with the cremation certificates, and with the actual paper medical records. They weren't consistent with the stories that he told to members of families or to neighbours at the time. It was towards the end of the interview in relation to the first death that he was faced with irrefutable evidence that he had altered computerised medical records, that he actually broke down, and from that point on was uncooperative in any interviews that took place.
No comment.
People are also questioning the motive. Apart from forging a will, there appears to be no clear reason. Rumours that Shipman asked for a keepsake after a death are now rife, and some relatives report missing jewellery, but no answers are given. Shipman reveals nothing.
Her sister, Auntie Esther, she bought her the most beautiful necklace. And personally, this beautiful necklace was a thank you from one sister to another. And we've never seen that since Harold Shipman went through the bureau.
My mum's wedding ring wasn't on her finger, but it was a band. It was a gold band. There's no way you could identify it with the dozens and dozens of other gold bands that we found. But that wasn't the motive for killing these people. It couldn't have been just for little bits of trinkets like that. That was just something he took after the event.
Shipman has now been in prison for 4 years. In the aftermath of his trial, a full inquiry looked into the death of every single patient Shipman ever had, suspecting there to be more victims. And now the true horror comes to light.
This was an enormous case. I don't think that there has ever been a case as large as this, certainly in terms of the numbers of deaths.
To find out that the figure was well above 200, set at 215 at the very least, if not more, was deeply, deeply crushing, and it really damaged my confidence as a doctor.
I knew it was a lot. I had no idea it was going to run to the hundreds.
Shipman's killing spree spanned more than 20 years. With his first victim allegedly in 1975, Mrs. Eva Lyons. Despite the growing number of victims now coming to light, police decide not to press any more charges.
23 families had been in contact with the police, and they understood that there would be a second trial. When they discovered afterwards that there was to be no second trial, they were very angry.
There were two reasons. One, the trial judge had said that the sentence of life imposed on Harold Shipman would actually mean life and that he would never leave prison. The second reason was that the enormous publicity which had surrounded the trial meant that any future trial could not be fair.
They were particularly angered because they were notified of it by letter, and if memory serves me right, the letter was posted through their doors in the early hours of the morning, and yet the story had clearly been released to the newspapers the day before.
How could a serial killer go undetected for so long? Some would say the warning signs were there, but this is a calculating, dishonest man who fooled those who trusted him for over 2 decades. Shipman managed to obtain drugs dishonestly for years. His drugs bill at the surgery was also 60% above the health authority average.
And as much as there were suspicions being aroused at the time, the level of trust that existed in doctors allowed him to dissipate these suspicions with relative ease and to deceive everyone around him, including myself, who he deceived over and over again.
There were other families who just simply didn't believe that it was true and thought that the judge and the jury had got it wrong. And I think that even during the inquiry and even after the report came out, there were still families who just didn't believe what they were hearing.
As a result of the murders, the Shipman inquiry made some major recommendations to the health authority in monitoring practitioners.
There have been massive changes in regulation of doctors and health professionals since Shipman. Doctors now face a scheme of revalidation where they will have to undergo a kind of MOT style of check to allow them to keep their registration in order to practice as a doctor. There will also be systems put in place that allow recording of concerns around behaviours, conduct, practice. The General Medical Council is now becoming a body which is far more concerned about the well-being of the public and its patients than the profession it previously represented.
Will this ever prevent another Shipman?
He was a one-off. I don't think there'll ever be anyone like that again. I mean, obviously there are serial killers in various different types of life. He just had the access to kill people and maybe got away with it longer because he was a doctor.
Impossible, I think, to stop somebody doing it again. What we can stop doing again is the fact carrying it out 215 times.
Over a 23-year period, Dr. Harold Shipman murdered 215 loyal patients by lethal injections. The true death toll could actually be closer to 500. Countless families are now left picking up the pieces from one man's actions and his betrayal of their trust.
think the hardest thing for the families was actually thinking about their relative dying. What was it that he said when he was injecting them with diamorphine?
She's thought of pretty much every day. She's missed so much. There's an engagement in the family. There's a baby born. She's the first person everybody wanted to tell, and she's not there.
You can't afford to let bitterness and hatred dominate everything you do, because you just become a bitter and twisted person yourself, and Shipman's won.
Harold Shipman committed suicide in Wakefield Prison in 2004. He never offered any explanation for his crimes.
Procedures have been tightened up now, but I wouldn't put money on it not happening again.
In 1992, 25-year-old Stephanie Slater was kidnapped and locked inside a coffin for 8 torturous days. Her attacker, Michael Sams, had already killed before. If Stephanie's employers didn't give in to his demands and release thousands of pounds, she would be murdered, making this a crime that shook Britain.
In a few minutes, you'll hear the voice of the man who kidnapped Stephanie Slater. It's the voice of someone who may well have been involved in other major crimes, of course, including murder.
He had the knife at my throat. He's over me, he's panting, and he just says, "If you move again, I'll slit your throat."
The ransom money was dropped near the village of Oxspring in the Barnsley area of Yorkshire. The kidnapper escaped with the money.
This man had also committed a murder in the past. We potentially have got a situation where Stephanie's life was in grave danger.
He said, "The only way your phone slides is when she's dead. If you ain't got her back in 24 hours, that's it."
Stephanie Slater was an intelligent young estate agent. She had a whole life ahead of her. But on the 22nd of January 1992, this all changed. Michael Sams kidnapped Stephanie at knife point and held her company to ransom. He wanted £175,000 in return for her life. This film will tell the story of Stephanie Slater through the eyewitness accounts of the people at the centre of the kidnap. Wednesday morning. Stephanie has been with Birmingham estate agent Shipways for just 6 weeks. Today, she has an appointment in the diary arranged by letter last week.
People would just normally phone up to book an appointment. You take their details over the phone, and then you go to the appointment when you'd arranged the time to do that. But with this, it was a letter. There was no phone confirmation whatsoever. So the day in question, on the Wednesday morning, myself and Jane, the other girl, looked through the diary, and I said, "Look, I tell you what, Jane, I'll do this appointment because he hasn't confirmed. So he probably isn't going to be there. So you go with Kevin on that valuation and I'll do this."
Stephanie deals with other inquiries before rushing to the viewing 2 minutes away on Turnberry Road.
I just said, "Mr. Southall?" He said yes, and I said, "Oh, I'm sorry I'm a bit late." He didn't say anything.
The house has been vacant for some time. The man shows some interest before being shown upstairs.
It was a normal house viewing. I've done hundreds and hundreds in my time. To hurry up the viewing because I had the feeling that he wasn't interested in the house. So I said, "Do you want to go upstairs? Have a look up there." I think he said something about, "Is that double glazed?" referring to the side window, which I said yes it was, because all of the upstairs, I believe, was double glazed, especially, well, the bathroom definitely was.
An unsuspecting Stephanie allows the man a cursory look around the top floor while she waits in one of the bedrooms. But what is about to happen will change her life forever.
This moment in time, he was looking around the house. I didn't think he was that interested, so I just walked off into one of the rooms. Because it's early in the morning, you want to get back to the warm office and your cup of coffee, and sometimes that's how it is, you know, you don't want to be in a freezing cold house. And
I don't know, sometimes you get a bit complacent. So I walked past him and started to walk down the stairs. It was at this point he suddenly took an interest. He said, "What's that up there?" So in order to answer his question, I have to walk past him to see what he's actually pointing at. And it was just a hook on the wall. I said, "What this? This is just for a flannel or a towel to be hung on." And he didn't answer me, which I found strange because he'd asked a question. So as I turned around, he just suddenly changed. All I can remember was he seemed to grow bigger, huge. He seemed to be flying through the air at me. His face was all contorted. It takes a couple of seconds for your brain to register that this is danger. And it was absolute and total sheer terror, because you realise now, oh my God. That's the only thing that goes through your head is, oh my God. He pulled his hands up in front of him and he got flashes of silver coming out of his hands. The flashes of silver were weapons. One was a knife, the other was a flat chisel with a hook on the end of it. Horrible things. I just thought, I've got to get past him, I've got to get round him, I've got to get out of here. Now he's shouting at me, he's screaming at me, he's got the weapons in my face, he's trying to overpower me. I'm in this fight with this grubby little man, you know, this doesn't happen surely to God. And I just thought he was going to cut me or rape me. There was nothing to pick up to help myself, to attack him back with. There was nothing to defend myself with. I got nothing on me apart from a key. My face was getting nicked with the knife. Bits of my hair were coming off because he was cutting it with the knife. I reached out for the weapons, I grabbed them, and we were fighting over them now because I wouldn't let go. And I bent the chisel. I thought, well, that's one I've got rid of, and I don't know what happened to it. It was useless to him. But the other knife I've still got in my hand, and he's saying, let it go, and I won't, you see, because that's what it's going to hurt me with. What I've got here is what could kill me. I'm not letting it go. And I didn't, I held on to it. And then, of course, to get it back, he pulled it hard down through my hand. I looked down at my hand, and he then jumped on me. And he grabbed my hair from behind and twisted it round, so he wrenched my head back. And then he pushed me over the side of the bath. And he was going, go on, get your legs in, get your legs in. And I can just remember looking up at this mirror, and in this mirror I could see my face and my neck and the knife sticking right here. He's above me holding the knife to my throat, saying, I'm going to slit your throat, I'm going to cut your throat if you start screaming.
Wednesday, 22nd of January. 15 minutes ago, Stephanie Slater was confronted in a frenzied attack. What she thought was a normal viewing of her property has now turned into a struggle to save her life.
And I said, all right, you've got me. All right, you've got me. Don't harm me, please remember I'm human. And that did seem to work.
Stephanie is overpowered and forced downstairs at knife point.
I thought he was going to tie me up, and in that house he was going to rape me. Then he tied a noose around my neck. So then I thought, no, he's going to hang me. And then he said, where are your keys? And I said, what keys? He said, the car keys. And I thought, oh, he wants the car. He can have the bloody car. So I said, I left them downstairs on the cabinet in the entrance hall. And so now he's walking me down the stairs one step at a time, holding me by this rope that's at the back of my neck. Because the rope I thought he was going to hang me from, he wants it as a dog leash. So I can't run off. And he's got the knife sticking into my back, and he's walking me down the steps one step at a time. We get to the bottom. And I realise it isn't the key he wants. It's me. And so I said, the keys are in my pocket.
Despite Stephanie's cry for help, nobody comes to the rescue.
This was the worst time for me because I'm sitting on the stairs. I can look up in front of me, and I've left the front door open, like you always should. And as I went to push down on my legs to quickly lever myself up to get me out that front door, It was like I didn't have legs from the knees down. It was like they weren't there. I'd gone into shock so much, I couldn't even feel my lower legs. By now, he's blindfolded me anyway, and I'm thinking, oh, that's it. You've just signed your own death warrant.
The petrified and vulnerable estate agent is now forced from the house with a knife to her side and led to the attacker's waiting car. Stephanie now vanishes from Birmingham without a trace. Unbeknown to Stephanie, she is being driven over 70 miles northeast to Newark. Although blindfold, she tries to take in details of the journey.
You know, the timings, how long she'd stopped. She recalled at one stage them stopping it, then she heard trains going by. You know, did she have the sun in her face? Was it on this side, that side? So all this information is being pulled together.
As Stephanie slips further away, concerned colleagues are now aware she hasn't returned to the office.
Kevin and the other girl in the office, Jane, they actually drove past Turnberry Road and my car was still outside, and they commented to each other that, oh, she's been there a long time, hope she's okay.
And as her boss and colleagues now grow increasingly worried, the attacker's car grinds to a halt, and the journey takes an unusual twist.
He stopped the car, we were somewhere quiet away from traffic, and he kind of half sat me up, said, no screaming, I have the knife, and he took down the gag. And he said, I don't know whether you realise, but you've been kidnapped. I almost laughed because I thought, well, my family's got no money. You've got the wrong person here, you know. And then he said, I'm going to be asking Shipways for £175,000 for your safe return. And he said, we're going to make a tape to your boss. He said, I've written out the ransom note. He said, but you're going to speak it. So I've got a tape recorder here.
Stephanie has now been kidnapped for 3 hours. And the horror is about to unfold with her boss, Kevin Watts.
The police first heard about Stephanie's disappearance when a phone call was made to Shipways, which was where Stephanie worked, to the manager Kevin Watts. Now, they knew that Stephanie had gone to this house to allow a viewing with a client. There was an indication that there was going to be a letter sent.
As Kevin Watts takes in the enormity of what he's just been told, Stephanie is being driven further from their reach.
Kevin doesn't know what to do. So he phones his boss and tells him what's happened. And his boss sort of says words to the effect that, well, this is bigger than us, Kev. We've got to do something. We've got to tell the police. But you tell them quietly what's happened. Tell them they're not supposed to know, and we'll do all this covertly. Well, within 5 minutes of his phone call, there were uniformed officers at Turnberry Road and at Shipways. The kidnapper could still be watching the house. He could be watching here. If he sees police everywhere, she's dead.
Police now take on board the seriousness of Stephanie's disappearance. All the while, her ordeal deepens. The kidnapper has just pulled in to a quiet lay-by.
He turned off the engine and he said something like, oh, do you want a cup of tea and a ham sandwich? And I thought, what? You've done all this to me. I'm cut and bleeding and bruised and you've injured me, and now you're offering me a bloody picnic.
Stephanie's colleagues and police have no idea of her whereabouts. As officers search the property she vanished from, they find some alarming clues.
There had been a struggle in the bathroom. There was evidence of a small amount of blood. There was also evidence that they'd gone out through the back French windows, probably into the garage. Stephanie's nowhere to be found. A vehicle's there. The scenes of a struggle, and it was looking fairly grim at that stage.
Police make the difficult decision to inform Stephanie's parents.
And when I got home, there was a police sergeant and another girl, and Stephanie's gaffer, Kevin Watts, and I asked straight away, and I said, what's the problem? What's the trouble? And they said, well, Stephanie went to an house this morning and we haven't seen her since she disappeared dinner time. You actually think the worst at the moment, and you think, well, what could have happened, see? And there's all different things running through your head.
It is now 6 p.m, As Stephanie's parents take in the devastating news, the kidnapper pulls in to their final destination.
He said, "No screaming, not that anybody's going to hear you out here." He shuffled me across like a gravel driveway, and I heard him pull open a very heavy sounding metal door. He led me in, through on cobblestones. I can remember them being under my feet. And now we're inside the workshop. And he took me through to the back and sat me on a chair and tied me with thick rope to the chair. I can remember thinking, this is it. You're going to die in here.
Estate agent Stephanie Slater has been kidnapped from an empty property. Blindfold and held at knife point, she has been driven over 70 miles from her hometown in Birmingham. Her colleagues are aware of her disappearance after a terrifying phone call from her attacker. Police have now scrambled to the property to find her blood in the bath. Stephanie has now been missing for over 7 hours.
In the first instance, it was very, very low key, but we did have a police station that was more or less given to us as the joint inquiry. I had officers down from West Yorkshire working with the West Midlands officers.
Over 2 hours from home, an exhausted Stephanie has been dragged into a filthy workshop. Her attacker has rendered her defenceless, and Stephanie is becoming more confused by his behaviour.
He went behind me. He was touching my hair, pulling his hands through it. And you just see in your mind horror stories and horror films over and over again where someone's behind you stroking your hair and then suddenly there's an axe coming down on top of you or something. That's what was going through my mind. Why is he doing that? It was creeping me out. And he said, right, take your clothes off. I've got clothes here for you to wear. And I thought suddenly, no chance. No way, you're not undressing me. No, you're not taking my modesty as well. And I flatly refused. And they started to make him angry. And he said, I'm not having this. Take your clothes off. You're sitting there blindfolded and you can't see anything. And all you can hear is a footstep here or there. And where you hear the footstep, you turn because you know he's there or he's there behind you. And suddenly he was here right next to me. And he said something like, what about Susie Lamplugh? And I thought, oh my God. It was like a bolt of ice went through me. Of course I knew the name. Of course I knew. She was an estate agent. She was like me. She went missing in '86. I don't know what was behind that remark, but if he was trying to frighten me, he was doing a damn good job.
Stephanie has now been missing for over 9 hours. An apparent victim of a kidnap attempt, she has limited knowledge of what lies ahead. Just as she is led to believe she's being held for ransom, her ordeal becomes even more horrific.
So in the end, when he threatened me again with the knife, I undressed. He took my hands via the handcuff chain in between, and with one of his hands he pulled my hands above my head, and with his other hand he said, right, you're lying back. And with his other hand he pushed it into my chest and he pushed me back hard onto the mattress, and then he crawled on top of me at an angle and he proceeded to rape me. And he bit me, you know. That was the worst. It was the biting, my face and my neck, my chest, my shoulders. He really bit me. But I thought, no, you know what? I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to shout out. You're not going to get off on this. If you're going to kill me, then so be it, but you're not going to go out in any glory. And then he got off in silence. He wiped me down all over with a damp cloth. And then he gave me men's clothes to wear. And he said, and that won't happen again. Not that it were much. And this changed me, the rape. It changed me completely because I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't frightened anymore because I felt so dead inside. And as a woman, he's kind of done everything he can do to me now to hurt me. There's nothing else. I feel indestructible now because you know what? I really didn't care anymore.
As the threat to Stephanie's life increases, police are unaware they are dealing with a violent rapist. Back in Birmingham, they pull in resources from West Yorkshire from officers working on a similar case. Their next step is to reach the package sent to Shipways as quickly as possible.
The police looked through the sorting office that night to try to sort of get a little bit of a march on the kidnapper. If they could get the letter a little bit earlier, they might be able to have more time to make decisions.
Stephanie's attacker has carefully constructed a makeshift coffin inside a bin, indicating this is a man who has calculated his attack. He now reminds her of the chilling danger she is facing.
I didn't care if I lived or died anymore. I felt nothing. And so when he said to me, "I hope you're not claustrophobic," I shrugged my shoulders and I said no. And he said, "That's good, because you're going in a box within a box."
In Birmingham, police are desperate to uncover the package sent to Stephanie's boss. It could hold vital clues to her whereabouts. Eventually, they uncover it.
Within that first letter were the demands. There was a tape where the kidnapper had hurriedly recorded Stephanie's voice, obviously to give it authenticity, and some demands in the letter.
He phoned them to say there was a tape in the post at Birmingham, and they got down the sorting office and found this tape, and they brought it back and they played it to Betty and I, just to confirm it was Stephanie.
This is Stephanie Slater. The time is 11:45. I can assure you I am okay and unharmed. Providing these instructions are carried out, I will be released on Friday the 31st of January. For next Wednesday you will need an ordnance survey map.
As Stephanie's voice rings out to those closest to her, she has no idea if the tape has even been sent. The threat to her life is increasing by the minute, and now the kidnapper inflicts more terror.
He said, "You've got to get into it like a sleeping bag." So I get halfway down, I can't get any further. It's too narrow, it's too tight. And I told him this, and he said, "That's rubbish." He said, "You've got to go in there. I got in there early when I tried it out." He said, "It's easy. Push yourself in, get down, you've got to go in." He said, "No two ways about it." Then he told me there were boulders above the bar, above my head, and if I pulled on them, they'd come down and they'd crush me to death. And then my hands were pulled above my head to the left of me, and via the handcuff chain they were attached to a metal bar that went across the top of the box. So I'm in a corkscrewed kind of position, totally twisted. My back was in terrible, terrible agony. And now he's pushing something very sharp up my right trouser leg. He said, "Can you feel that?" And I said, "That is really hurting." And he said, "Good, it's supposed to, those are electrodes. You move around in that box and they'll electrocute you, they'll kill you instantly."
Stephanie now lies in grave danger. One slight move will cost her her life. As police try to decipher the ransom note, they call for an immediate media blackout. They can't risk agitating the kidnapper. Another concern is some horrifying similarities in the ransom to a crime West Yorkshire officers are also trying to solve.
I mean, we were dealing with the murder of Julie Dart, which we'd linked to an extortion with British Rail, which was in, the murder was in July 91 and the extortion in October. We'd received a demand letter for, in the Julie Dart case. The phraseology used in the letters was similar. There were similar misspellings of words in the letters. So we were able to put this sort of circumstantial case together that this could well be the same man.
I was always in fear for my life, and I thought, yes, he could get the money and he could kill me.
25-year-old estate agent Stephanie Slater has been kidnapped and brutally raped at the hands of a vicious attacker. She has now been forced to lie in a makeshift coffin. If she moves, she dies. Meanwhile, police officers have just picked up a ransom demand and chillingly linked her attacker to a murder 6 months previously. Their next move is crucial, as Stephanie's life hangs in the balance.
The kidnapper wanted Kevin Watts to be the courier. There's obviously very high-level decisions to make here, because if, as we suspected at that time, this man had also committed a murder in the past, we potentially have got a situation where, one, Stephanie's life was in grave danger, and also potentially Kevin Watts.
The police have to carefully decide their next move. One wrong decision will end Stephanie's life. Pressure mounts as the hours go by. They have no leads on her whereabouts. Meanwhile, she has only just survived the night.
I was going into hypothermia, and he said don't pull on the metal bar because of the boulders. So as my arms are getting numb, they're getting heavy, and I can't feel what they're doing, whether they're pulling on the bar or whatever. And I can still remember to this day lying in the box, and I've got my thumb on my chin like that because I'm trying to hold it up. Then I just couldn't feel anything. My whole body went numb, and then I was shivering, and then I dropped. My body kind of dropped, and again I pulled on the bar, but the boulder stayed there. But as the night wore on, to be honest with you, I didn't really care if that bar came down. I didn't want to be there for him in the morning. And then I saw a white light in the corner of the box. And I said to myself quite openly, oh, right, now you're losing your mind. You're blindfolded in a black box, and now you're seeing a light. And inside that light was the face of Christ. As I say, I don't go to church, I'm not religious, and I felt quite privileged to have seen this. And I just felt at ease all of a sudden and felt peace. I thought I'd died. I'd simply fallen asleep.
As each hour slowly ticks by, Stephanie bears the brunt of the kidnapper's strange behaviour. His mind games are almost too much to bear.
He did come back not long after. I honestly think to this day he was really shocked that how close to death I probably looked and how ill and pale I probably was. And he had to half carry me to a chair, and he sat me on the chair and he gave me a cup of tea. He must have been watching me. He said, you can't move your arms at all. And I said, well, I was frozen in that box last night. And then the tea was abruptly taken away from me. And I thought, oh, damn, I've complained, I've said something. You are treading on eggshells all the time. And then I didn't know where he was. I couldn't sense him. I couldn't hear that footstep or any movement. He was down on his hands and knees. And he takes my left arm and he rubs it hard. To say, there you go, is that better? Can you feel that now? Is that better? Is that getting warmer? How about this one? Moves round. That one, how's that arm? As surreal as this was, and it was very strange, I suppose it was at this stage, initially I thought, maybe, just maybe, there's a spark of humanity in him. Maybe there's something worth working on.
But police already fear they are now dealing with a man who has killed before, and he could strike again.
As soon as possible, in case he rings.
After the kidnapper's first contact, officers now decide to plant devices should he call again.
And there's only me could answer the phone. Elliot got to call me and press a button. So, I'd got a card what to say. When the phone went, Ellie came, told me when to pick the receiver up, and she pressed what button she got to say. Then she'd say, right, speak.
It would be important to us as an investigation to have a record of his voice. Also, if he gave any instructions and he spoke to Stephanie's parents, they may not be they may be in a state of shock and not remember the detail.
And other elements are now firmly in place, as officers, colleagues and family are poised for the kidnapper's next move.
I mean, there's many different roles in a kidnap inquiry such as this, and one of them would be family liaison officers, who would be, in this case, with Stephanie's parents.
We never went out of the house till the night she came back. But they made sure we ate, and they kept us occupied.
So we have to keep them informed and also protect them and also be aware that there might be a phone call comes into their house.
Sunday afternoon, 5 days into the ordeal, the kidnapper surfaces again.
Hello, we might be having a sandwich or doing something, and the phone went about 2 o'clock. Picked it up, and it was Stephanie on the phone. But it was a tape.
I want you to say, hello, this is Stephanie here.
Hello, it's Stephanie here. They have allowed me to send a message to you, just to let you know I am all right and unharmed. I hear that West Bromwich Albion lost yesterday to Swansea, 3-2.
I looked at Ellie, and I said, that's Stephanie today.
I want you to know I love you. I am not to say too much, but whatever the outcome, I'll always love you. Look after the cats for me.
Hello, Harold Slater. Can I just ask, is she all right?
Two phone calls, a tape and a ransom note. The police understand this man is to be taken seriously. There is now increasing pressure placed on Kevin Watts. Officers start to prepare him for what could be the hardest task of his life.
He had to be sort of trained to buy time. Ask if the voice comes, if he gets to the phone box, ask the question twice, try and buy some time.
As police gear up for a major operation, Stephanie is constantly being pulled through a psychological nightmare. Her attacker switches between compassion and inflicting panic, reminding her she is at the mercy of a hardened criminal.
And I said something and I made him laugh. And after he finished laughing, he said, "Oh, I'm going to have to get rid of that now, aren't I?" And I said, "What's that? Get rid of what? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Over there in the corner, I've got a bin to take your dead body out in." And that kind of scratched the surface, and I could feel all this emotion and this fear and everything. And I reached out for him, and I was saying, "Bob, where are you? Bob, come on, where are you, Bob? You're not going to kill me, are you? Not now." But and I was sort of like, I couldn't really breathe. I couldn't talk because I was in so much fear, and I was crying. The blindfold was soaking wet, and I was reaching for him like a child would reach for a parent.
Tuesday. Stephanie disappeared a week ago, her whereabouts unknown. And all the police have are a number of obscure demands from her kidnapper. Now, he makes contact again.
Hello? Have you got the money? Who's this, please? Never mind. Have you got the money? For tomorrow? For tomorrow? Yeah. Have you got it? I'm getting it, yeah.
When the instructions came into Kevin Watts, that was when it was all systems go.
As officers make sense of the latest message, Stephanie's disappearance is now taking its toll on those closest to her.
Betty had a seizure on the Friday, the first one on the Friday to her heart. I had to fetch the doctor, but it was the start of problems. That was, Stephanie was away.
Stephanie, unaware her mother is in such turmoil, is trying hard to stay positive. So far, she has contained her fear. This man has fed and clothed her for 7 days. She hangs on his word that she will be released. Now, she hears noises in the workshop once more, as her kidnapper returns from the phone call to her boss.
He bought in a mattress, and he also later on bought in a second mattress. So there are two now. I slept on one, and he was to sleep on the other. I've got milk and Kit Kats and crisps and things, and I'm putting them down the middle like a barrier, like, stay away from me, don't touch me sort of thing. Later on that evening, he said to me, how did he put it? If I was to ask you to do what happened on the first night, what would you say? He was referring to the rape. And I said, I'd ask you not to ask that of me, because I don't want to. And he said, that's all right, I just thought I'd ask. Through those 8 days, somehow I'd managed to get some respect from him, it was a tremendous hurdle to get over. But I'd done it.
Each day for Stephanie has been an emotional roller coaster. Her attacker, on the other hand, has made her ordeal part of his daily routine.
It seems totally incredible to me now that I was at the back of the workshop in the coffin and in the box, and he opens up his workshop to members of the public. I can hear him using a till, I can hear him on the phone, chatting to people, laughing with people and having a joke. And I'm at the back, all chained up and locked away, imprisoned.
Her captor runs a small tool repairing shop just yards away. Each day he opens up to regular customers. His wife even drops by with his lunch.
I think, okay, do I scream? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Do I shout for help? But what if he hears me and they don't? He was a man of very few words, but he liked to talk to me. You know, when we sat down and had soup and that, it was weird, it was surreal, because I knew in the back of my head that my life was on the line here, and one wrong move and that's it. But the times that he would give me something to eat or drink, or would pay me a compliment, he even took my photograph once. It was so strange. You know, it's like the table's really turning, but it was because I was compliant. It was because I didn't give him any reason to harm me.
Meanwhile, the pressure is mounting on Stephanie's employer. Kevin Watts has the horrifying responsibility of meeting the kidnappers' demands. The whole operation lies on his shoulders. Neither he nor Stephanie may come out of this alive.
He was happy to do this. I don't know whether he realised until afterwards that the potential, but I know from speaking with him and his wife afterwards, you know, there were a few tears shed that morning when he knew, when he left home, that, you know, it depended on him, possibly, whether Stephanie came back alive.
As Stephanie anxiously waits to see how the day unfolds, her attacker is leading her boss and the police through his carefully constructed game plan.
His first one was at Glossop railway station, where he was told to go to the kiosk inside the entrance of the railway station, and he would receive a phone call. He got there, he then received a message to go to another kiosk, and he's got his instructions to go to a telephone box in an area called Four Lane Ends, which is in the Sheffield area.
As Kevin follows his instructions and heads over the Pennines, he travels deeper into the unknown. The kidnapper wants to shake the police should they be involved, and so far, it's working.
That night, the fog came down. This really upped the ante. That meant Kevin Watts was now behind schedule. He'd been given times when he had to be at the next phone box because the phone would ring. He got to Four Lane Ends, it was late. He's panicking a little bit by this stage. He gets his instructions, which is then to go down this lane nearby. And as he gets to the entrance to the lane, he sees a sign, Shipways, directing him which way to go.
The pressure is now immense. Kevin is behind schedule, no clue of his whereabouts, and alone with the kidnapper's ransom. The attacker could pounce at any moment.
He's now isolated. He's in a strange place, down a narrow lane, feeling highly vulnerable. He gets halfway down the lane, and there's a big cone in the middle of the lane. It tells him is to swap the money from one bag to another.
The kidnapper now lies in wait as Kevin follows his final instructions. He lays the money on a wall, unaware there is a 60-foot drop right on the other side. As soon as Kevin is out of earshot, the attacker pounces for his ransom.
Sam's is 60 feet below the bridge. Attached to the wooden tray is a fishing line. The tray stood on its sand. Sam's yanks on the fishing line and down tumbles the money. He's on his moped. He's travelled there, he's had his moped in the back of his car. He puts the money into the back of the pannier and off he rides.
Meanwhile, over 50 miles away in Newark, Stephanie now thinks she has been left to die.
That was one hell of a long day. You're talking from 8 o'clock in the morning until 11:30 at night. That's how long I was in there. And you can imagine the panic I was in when he said, I'll be back at 9:30, and he wasn't. Because then you think he's got the money and he's gone.
The kidnapper has successfully fled with £175,000, and the police have no trace on him. Kevin has made the drop, but he has no idea if the attacker now has the money, or if Stephanie is dead or alive.
I thought he'd abandoned me and he'd gone. I tried to commit suicide that night by suffocation because I was so frightened. I just put the blankets that he'd given me in the box in my mouth and over my face and pushed my face into the side of the box.
The money's gone. We haven't got a prisoner and we haven't got Stephanie. You know, everybody was absolutely gutted.
In the distance, Stephanie hears a faint noise. Although behind schedule, her kidnapper has returned.
I shouted at him, "Is that you? Where have you been? Have you got the money? Please, God, get me out of here." After a few minutes of that, he actually came over to the box and opened it and got me out, and I collapsed into his arms. I've never been so weak in all my life, or so frightened.
Remarkably, Stephanie's attacker, true to his word, prepares her for the journey home. All the while, police, colleagues and family have no idea she's about to return.
He said, "I've decided that I'm going to take you home because I don't want anything bad to happen to you." He said I was going to give you a knife and put you in a phone box so you could call the police. The knife to protect yourself if anybody came at you. He said, so to make sure that you get home safe, I'm taking you home.
"8 days after her disappearance, Stephanie Slater arrives on her doorstep, alone.
I was ringing the bell, knocking the knocker. The door wasn't answered for ages.
The door started to bang, you see. He said, leave it. And he come down and opened the door, see.
And then when it was opened, there was a young blonde man stood there on the threshold of the door, looking down at me. He was Mum and Dad's liaison officer. He didn't recognise me.
And there she was standing in front of me.
And he reached over him and he grabbed hold of my top of my coat and pulled me up into the porch.
Stephanie, through her own wit and instinct, saved her own life, and highly admirable is that.
As Stephanie and her family face the country's media glare and take in the enormity of her ordeal, police launch a nationwide hunt to find her kidnapper. A man they believe has also killed 18-year-old Julie Dart and attempted to defraud British Rail, Michael Sams.
We got the information from Stephanie, what she'd remembered. We'd got information from witnesses. We'd got an artist's impression. We'd got witnesses who said it was when they saw him at the house. So all these pieces were put together.
Three weeks after Stephanie's abduction, police appeal for her kidnapper on BBC's Crime Watch.
In a few minutes, you'll hear the voice of the man who kidnapped Stephanie Slater.
password. If you'll tell me a word, I'll get her to repeat it to say that she's all right.
Yes. Could I have her mother and father's Christian names, please?
A lady called Susan Oakes, an interest in this. She'd been following some of the information that had come out, and they'd started to develop this idea that it might be her ex-husband, Michael Sams. I dispatched the team off. He wasn't in, his wife Tina was there, so they wouldn't be back till 5 o'clock there. I said, no, it's not urgent. We watched Crime Watch last night. He said he might be getting a visit. That had a nervy 10-minute drive then from Sutton-in-Trent to the Swan and Salmon Yard where Sam's workshop was. And when they walked through the door, they knew, that this was gold.
Mr. Sams, I've got some questions to ask you about Stephanie Slater.
Everything that Stephanie had said about this place, she'd heard the ring, the sound of a dial on the old telephone, the ping of a microwave. Almost immediately confessed to the kidnapping of Stephanie.
Michael Sams was given 4 life sentences in 1993. He was found guilty of blackmailing British Rail, murdering Julie Dart, and Stephanie's kidnap and imprisonment.
Sams is a very sad individual. He's dyslexic. That was part of his downfall in the spelling mistakes in his letters, which helped us track him down. He's a very bright man, very arrogant, very self-centred. He can't face up to his mistakes.
For years, 50-year-old Sams had been a hard-working husband and father. His brush previously with crime had been for car theft. An illness led to Sams losing a leg, and some said his attitude changed. Indeed, his split personality was a major part of his game plan.
He also tried to frighten me with talk that he had a mate who was in this with him, but his mate apparently was a nasty piece of work and it was a good job that he wasn't looking after me.
It was the other man who wanted to kill Stephanie. It was the other man who'd murdered Julie Dart. And it was the other man who'd actually tried to extort £200,000 out of British Rail with this brilliant idea that the other man had stolen off him. The other man is an illusion created by Sams.
Stephanie has moved on with her life and fought hard to get over her ordeal. Her mental strength and resilience is testament to how she survived those horrifying 8 days. Her continued courage and determination not to be beaten is an inspiration.
Everything changed from the day she went missing. Why he did rape her, because that did stick in my claw. Of course there was no need to. I complied with him all the time, so I ain't got a lot of compassion for him at all. I couldn't care less what happened to him, really. That's it. He can rot. He can rot.
Yes, he was calculating. Yes, he did plan it to a certain extent. But he was no master criminal. At the end of it, he was just lucky. You can analyse him until the cows come home, but it doesn't matter, does it? He doesn't matter. In this world, he doesn't matter.